So we're picking up where we left off, talking about the system.out.print and system.out.println methods, as well as a little bit of an introduction to the Java API. So a lot of the programs that you'll write will run in a console window, and the program that we talked about last time, this little test program, this simple.java, you'll remember it has the same name as the file name, so public class simple and simple.java. That was not an accident that those are the same name. In fact, you see down here a method that we didn't really talk about a whole lot, system.out.println, that is accepting this string called programming is great fun. So it's located in between these parentheses right here. And that's actually what got printed out to the screen in our last example. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about what that method is, what it does. And this is going to be sort of our first foray into printing out output from our program. So when we talk about our print and println methods, the console window that we have been talking about, for instance, our terminal window right here that we've been looking at, this is what we refer to as a standard output device. That's a pretty common way to talk about it. And so this standard output device is the means by which we communicate information back to the user. There are other sorts of output devices and there are other ways to interact with the user, but this is the default, the standard output device. And that's the reason for the out in system.out.print or system.out.println, for instance. That out is representing the standard output device. Likewise, when we talk about standard input, we're typically talking about the keyboard, and we'll be looking at system.in in the future, sort of helping you understand that there is that analogy as well. So the standard input device is the keyboard. And so you can think about back in the old days with the old teletype machines, when you would type something on the keyboard, it would appear on the screen. That was our standard input device. In fact, in many cases was our only input device. And when those characters displayed on screen, or when a program would print something out to the screen, that was our standard output device. And that's where a lot of this terminology comes from. These days, we're very used to interacting with programs that are themselves, windowed programs. They display a window to the screen, and we can click in different spots using our mouse. We may hit the keyboard a few times. We may interact with programs in different ways. I'm recording this lecture right now with a microphone. A microphone is an input device, but what we refer to as the standard input device is the keyboard. And so Java sends information to the standard output device using these Java classes, for instance, system, to do this with the standard Java library. And thank goodness it does, because as you sort of progress in computer science, we'll talk a little bit about different ways to interact with the user, different ways to interact with software, printing stuff out to the screen. The process of printing characters out to the screen is actually incredibly complicated. It requires storing all of that data into a very specific buffer in memory, so a specific location in memory on our computer, and then forcing the computer to sort of interrupt what it's doing. We call those software interrupts. To sort of interrupt what it's doing in order to put those characters on screen. And it actually, if you look at the way it's written at the machine level, so something like assembly language, something that's very close to the way a machine operates, if you look at code written that way, it takes a lot of effort to print characters out to the screen. And so Java actually makes that a lot easier for us by giving us these very simple methods that do a lot of the hard part under the hood. We don't have to worry about it. We don't have to take care of that. Java does it for us. And so these methods for printing out characters to the screen seem very simple. But as with anything, these functions, these methods that are provided to us are meant to simplify our lives. They're meant to simplify the work that we do. And so even though, just printing things out to the screen might seem really straightforward, it's actually doing a lot for us. So Java classes in the standard Java library are accessed using what we refer to as an application programming interface, or an API. And you'll often hear us talk about the Java API. We'll talk about the Java API throughout the semester. And the Java API refers to a collection of classes, a library full of classes that Java provides to us to provide a lot of common functionality that we might need. So, the Java API in this case is providing to us methods for printing things out to the screen. There's methods for doing all sorts of different things, storing information in databases, handling security, connecting to websites, things like that. Java provides a lot of those methods for us for some of the most common things that we might want to do. And this is referred to as the Java API. It's a large collection of classes that are provided to us free of charge for us to use in our code. And so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already provided for us. We can use those in programs that we write. So in our previous example, we saw one line, as I mentioned before, it said system.out.println, and then inside parentheses, it had a string that contained the characters "programming is great fun." And this actually uses the system class from the standard Java library. And the system class contains different system level methods that we might want. But in particular, the system class contains an object called out that is a member of the system class that has methods called print and println. Now, these methods are incredibly useful. We'll talk about them as well as a third one in this semester. But as far as explaining exactly what all of those details mean, what does it mean that system is a class? What does it mean that out is an object? What exactly is a method? We'll be talking about a lot of those as we progress on. And so more and more, I'm going to be giving you this sort of feedback that, I'll demystify this line later, but for right now, you just have to understand that this is the magical incantation to get certain things to happen. System.out.println is no exception to that. So when you see system.out.println or system.out.print, or the third one that we'll see in a little bit, you just recognize that that means that characters are going to be printed to the screen. And this is often very useful to give feedback to the user, to communicate that the program is running correctly, or to, show some values, things like that. And we'll make use of that as we continue on. And so here you can see sort of a basic structure of what that system class looks like. So we have that class, and it has other members including out, but it has out as well. And the out object is a member of the system class that itself has two methods, print and println. And so what do those actually mean? Well, they perform the task of sending characters to the output device. So the way we would read this right here is system.out.println. That's sort of a common way to articulate because of the fact that I'm communicating a lot of this code to you verbally. We have to sort of get used to how do I say that out loud? And when I say it out loud, what does it actually mean in code? So when I say system.out.println, I mean what's written right here on this line right here, system.out.println. And the dots are important. It's easy to think, well, why don't I just not say dot? Why don't I just say system.out.println? But that doesn't really communicate the same thing as saying system.out.println, and so it's very useful for us to say it that way. The value inside the parentheses is called an argument, and it will be sent to the output device. So in this case, it's a string. We're sending that string to the output device to be printed. So that's what this method does right here. The println method does the same thing as the print method. The println method places a new line character at the end of whatever's being printed out. So think about the terminal as if it were maybe a typewriter. So when you type a lot of characters on the typewriter, the register, the carriage is what's referred to, has been pushed all the way to the end. And in order to go to the next line, we hit the return key. And what the return key does is it says, okay, I need to go down to the next line on the carriage, and I want to go back to the beginning of the line. No different from that is the println method. So the println method actually prints out all of the text it's being asked to. So right here it says this is being printed out. And then the println character inserts for us a new line character that drops us down to the next line. And then on the next line, we print out on two separate lines. So that would be printed out on two separate lines. So let's actually take a quick look at that. So I have a terminal open right here, primed and ready for us. Our file is called example.java. And likewise, I have a class in here called example for that purpose. And so I can put right here, I can put, let's see, system.out.println. This is being printed out. System.out.println on two separate lines. And so if I compile this, remember we use javac, which is our compiler. I type example.java. That compiles it, and I run our program. And I see this is being printed out on two separate lines. Now you'll notice I didn't write any special code to insert a new line character. You actually have to insert it as a character. We'll talk a little bit about that later. but I didn't write any special code to do that. The println method did that for me. So when I wrote println, I knew that as soon as it printed out that string right there, it would go to the new line as its next action. And that was very useful for me. That's why I did it that way. So likewise, the print statement does the same thing. However, the print statement does not insert a new line character at the end of the line. So if I were to take my terminal as before, and I were to print out system.out.print instead, it says this is being printed out on 2 separate lines, which isn't true anymore. So this is being printed on the same line. So what do you think is going to happen here? It's important to sort of, before we just throw this at a compiler and see what the output is, it's important to think for a moment what's going to happen here. So I'm asking it to print these characters. I'm asking it to print, in the first case, this is being. Then in the second one, I'm asking it to print printed on the. And in the third one, I'm asking it to print out same line. Now, it's very easy for us to look at this and know what I'm wanting. But in reality, what I'm going to get is slightly different from what I'm wanting. So before I before I compile this, can you think about what might be wrong with this case? Well, in fact, the issue here is that what is printed is exactly what I wrote. So I'm going to compile my program again and run it. And you'll notice the error that we're having here is that I actually ended up printing out everything on the exact same line with no spaces in between. And in fact, you'll see that my terminal, my next line of my terminal right here, actually ended up on the same line as my output. You know, I'm so used to seeing this show up on the next line every single time. But in fact, this time my next terminal line appeared on the same line as the output from this program. That's probably not what I wanted. So what can I do to fix this problem? Well, in fact, what I can do is, let's go back to my example here. Well, clearly one of the issues I'm facing is that I need to put spaces. But one way that I can fix this for right now is to change this to a new line with system.out.println. And I think what we're going to get is an output that's a little closer to what we were expecting here. So here you see this is being printed out, or printed on the same line, exactly as expected. And I got my next terminal window, my next line actually appeared on a new line on its own, rather than the way it was sort of adjoined to the output from my program right here. I actually got a brand new line, and that's because the same line, this last string that got printed, actually I printed out a new line character with it right here using the println command. So the question is, could I have done this differently? Maybe I don't want to use println. Maybe I want to do this some other way. Well, in fact, I can actually type an explicit new line character like that, \n. Now look at your keyboard right now, assuming that you're sitting in front of your keyboard, and you'll notice that there is a slash next to your right shift key that's on the same key as the question mark. And that is a /. That's what we refer to as a /. If you need to remember which one's the / and which one's the \, imagine drawing it from bottom to top. The one that's next to the right shift key actually is a / because it goes forward. In this case, drawn from bottom to top, this would be going backward. And that backward slash right here represents what we refer to as an escape sequence. This is the new line character, not a literal / followed by n, but it actually represents to Java. This says, I want you to print out the new line character. These two things right here, as far as Java is concerned, are one character. So when I compile this, it sees those and it compiles it into a single character. It compiles it into the new line character. There's no literal / and there's no literal n here. That information was combined by Java to represent a new line character. And the / is incredibly powerful in this way. It allows us to use escape sequences, or what we refer to as escape sequences. So we've been printing out strings of characters, and we can print out other things than that, but we can, in addition to just literal characters like I showed you, we can print out what we refer to as escape sequences. So you can see right here, it says this will have a new line right there. And the way that we print out that new line character is by using the \n. So this \n represents that escape sequence, or is an escape sequence that represents the new line character. And in general, escape sequences are used so that we can print characters that we would otherwise consider non-printable. So there are other things that you can print out using this method. You can print out the new line, which is what we just did. You can print out a horizontal tab. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. You can print out a backspace, and you can print out what we refer to as a carriage return. Now, both of these are a little bit curious options. Why would I ever want to print out a backspace? Why would I ever want to go back to the beginning of the line that I'm on? And the reason for that is sometimes you're going to want to overwrite characters that you've already written. For most of the programs that we're going to run, for most of the programs that we're going to write, this isn't particularly useful. You're going to print out some information that you want to be able to read down the road. But imagine if you've ever written or run, for instance, an installer on your computer. You might want to draw a progress bar on the screen that has sort of 0% filled, and so you draw the entire progress bar, but as progress continues to be made, you want to overwrite that progress bar. We don't want to draw a brand new progress bar. We want to overwrite the one that we already have so that we can show constant updates. And we can use our backspace characters or our return character, our carriage return character, to do that. We can actually see an example of that. So going back to my terminal window here, let's look right here. So what if I said, this is being printed on the same line, but I don't really want to print out the word line, so let's delete it. I'm going to backspace 5 times. So that allows us to go back to the word line. And instead, I'm going to say, this is being printed on the same space. And while this example isn't very sophisticated and doesn't really, it's sort of a toy example, you can actually see it in action right here. You can see that we don't see the word line. It's in my program. I don't have the word line anywhere in my output. Instead, I just ended up with the word space. Because I used 5 backspace characters, I was able to move my cursor backwards and overwrite it with the word space. And so in this way, I was able to overwrite a portion of my text. You can do this in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of useful reasons to want to do this, but this is just one way to achieve that goal. You may be asking yourself, okay, well, if the backslash character represents a special thing in Java, if the backslash character allows me to print out escape sequences, then that's kind of a problem, because what if I wanted to print out a literal backslash? Well, you can actually escape the backslash with another backslash. So you see here, if I type 2 backslash characters, I get a single literal backslash printed. I can demonstrate that very briefly so that you can kind of see that in progress. And it gets a little bit silly. I mean, you can kind of add this up. So, you know, here, let me go back to my old example right there. Now I'm going to say system.out.println. And let's say that I want to print out 2 backslashes to the screen. For instance, I want to print out a URL. So http:// or http:// www.google.com. Well, if I wanted to print this with backslashes instead, these 2 backslashes I've printed right here actually represent 1 backslash. I've escaped the backslash. So I would need 2 of them to end up getting 2. I would need 4 of them to print out 2. You notice here you can only see 2 being printed to the screen, but if you look carefully in my code, I've written 4. That's because these first 2 represented a single escaped backslash, and these next 2 represented a single escaped backslash. Likewise, sometimes I might want to print out a literal quotation mark. So here, if I were to type a quotation mark, it makes the program think that I've taken a break, I've exited my string. So for instance, if I wanted to add a quote, the boy said hello, my syntax highlighting here gives you a little bit of a clue that this is not working as expected. So this quotation mark right here makes this one think we're done, where in fact I wanted to print out literal quotation marks. So instead I can escape them to get that behavior. So that represents literal quotation marks. Likewise, you can do the same thing with single quotes. We'll see in a little bit why that's useful, but for right now, single quotes you can do the same thing for single quotes. And finally, looking at some of the characters that we've seen, we talk a little bit about why might you want to print out a tab character. And the reason for that, as you can see in this example, is maybe you want to create a tabbed list. Here are our top sellers: computer games, coffee, and aspirin. And it would be very difficult. I might have to type out literal spaces. I might have to figure out how to do the formatting in some sort of nice way. But I can just type \T to represent a tab character. And so here you can see that even though I'm printing out 4 lines here, I can do it with just a few print statements because I included a new line character here, included a tab character here, a new line character here, a new line character here, a tab character here, and all of this together ends up creating this list. Now, this is not a very nice way to write code. You would not want to write code that looks like this, but it does demonstrate that you're able to achieve something like this using predominantly escape sequence characters. And so writing it this way can achieve this goal, though there's probably much nicer ways to write this. For instance, if I want to achieve that same output, I might instead, let's clean this up a little bit. I might want to write it in a way that looks a little bit nicer. So system.out.println, I would say these are our top sellers. And because this is println, I know I'm going to get a new line character after this. So system.out.println. And I don't want to print literal spaces. I'm just going to print the tab character and say computer games. And then I'm going to say coffee and aspirin. And as exactly as expected, I'm going to end up getting the output I'm desiring without necessarily having to make it, as unseemly as this example right here looks. So I don't want to write code that looks like this. I want to write code that looks a lot nicer. I'd much rather my code look like this instead because I feel like this is more readable. And again, as we mentioned before, this is the human readable version. So it's important to make sure that we keep our code human readable. On our next video, we will talk a little bit about variables and literals and how we can use those in the programs that we're writing.